Hi, I'm Olivia, and today's happy nugget comes from Rudolf Nureyev, the great Russian dancer. Nureyev was one of the greatest ballet dancers of the 20th century. His dancing, coaching, directing, and choreography changed the face of ballet. In the late 1950s, Nureyev was a member of the prestigious Kirov Ballet Company in Leningrad. But in the Soviet system, everything was planned from birth to death by a bureaucracy. In communism, there is no place for individuality. Rudolf Nureyev yearned to make something different. He refused to accept preconditioned artistic values. He wanted to have his own individual artistic freedom. In 1961, in an unexpected trip to Paris with the ballet company, Nureyev defected from the Soviet Union, taking the Western world by storm. Rudolf Nureyev became one of the first ballet superstars. His popularity and charisma popularized ballet around the world, changing the course of dancing forever. In those days in the West, ballet was the realm of ballerinas. The male dancer was an appendage, an afterthought, someone to make the ballerina shine. Rudolf Nureyev raised the caliber of male dancing to an art form of conviction, passion, and technique. His dancing was magnificent and magnetic, both athletic and graceful. Nureyev respected the classical styles and traditions of the past, but he wasn't afraid to innovate, to look within a piece and make it contemporary. Nureyev brought to the West complete involvement, total commitment, and absolute intensity to a role. His dancing had expressive power, impact, and emotional suggestion. Nureyev infused a depth of humanity and psychological resonance in his roles. For Nureyev, he wasn't just learning the steps of a dance. He immersed himself in the souls of the characters he portrayed. From his wonderful 1963 autobiography, speaking of a time when he was 7 years old, Nureyev wrote, "My first encounter with ballet was unorthodox. Mother had only managed to buy a single ticket to the opera on that night for the entire family, but she was determined to try and get us all in somehow. So we arrived, my 3 sisters, my mother, and myself. At the door of the theater, we found a vast, impatient crowd. This was just at the end of the war. The natural love innate in every Russian for music and ballet was made even stronger during those years by the fact that one was prepared to give anything in exchange for a little dream. A momentary escape from the nightmare of everyday life. The Russians' boundless spiritual resources, the profundity of their inner life, the sheer capacity that they have to cut themselves away from the sordidness of their daily struggles, is for me perhaps the strongest explanation of the enormous success which almost any manifestation of art can command in the Soviet. I shall never forget a single detail of the scene that met my eyes. The theater itself with its soft, beautiful lights and gleaming crystal chandeliers, small lanterns hanging everywhere, colored windows everywhere, velvet, gold. Another world, a place which to my dazzled eyes you could only hope to encounter in the most enchanted fairy tale. From that unforgettable day when I knew such rapt excitement, I could think of nothing else. I was utterly possessed. From that day I can truthfully date my unwavering decision to become a ballet dancer. I felt called, watching the dancers that night, admiring their out-of-this-world ability to defy the loss of balance and gravity. I had the absolute certitude that I had been born to dance." Rudolf Nureyev was born in 1938 on a train heading to Vladivostok, where his father was stationed as a soldier for the Communist Party. Soon after, his family moved to Moscow, but at the beginning of the war, a bomb fell on their house, and they had to evacuate to their hometown of Ufa in Bashkir, on the eastern side of the Ural Mountains, halfway between Leningrad and Siberia. The Nureyevs were Tatars, descended from a race of warriors who'd been undefeated for 7 centuries, until they were forced to surrender to the Russians, but they never lost their fierce and indomitable spirits. Nureyev's parents were peasants, and even though his father worked for the Communist Party, they lived in extreme poverty, sharing 1 room for 3 families. Rudolf didn't have proper clothing, a coat, shoes, or much less food, many times fainting from sheer hunger. In those days, his only solace was listening to music for hours on the radio. When Rudolf entered school at the age of 7, he was taught Bashkir folk songs and dances, and he loved them. In spite of the aching hunger and poverty, Rudolph had an incredible capacity to absorb information like a sponge, grasping any subject the first time he heard it. Once taught the steps of a dance, they were memorized and engraved in his mind and body. When Rudolph was 11 years old, he met a cultivated lady who'd been a ballet dancer. She taught him the basic ballet positions and shared with him everything she knew about ballet and the great dancers. Rudolph dreamt of going to the famous Leningrad Ballet School, but for a provincial boy like him, that was a faraway dream. When Nureyev was 14, his obsession with dancing led him to skip classes, to attend rehearsals. His lack of interest in a solid career and politics were a constant source of frustration for his father, who forbade Rudolph to dance, thinking of an artistic career as something unacceptable, frivolous, and above all, unmanly. Rudolph sank into despair, but he led a double life, still dancing. He worked odd jobs at the opera house in his hometown of Ufa, and through cunning and improvising, taught folk dancing, managing to make as much money as his father. When Rudolph was 15, he'd saved enough money to make a 3-day trip to Moscow for the first time. Walking in the city day and night, he slept on public benches and railway station rooms. Even as a teenager, Rudolph had an incredible depth, introspective in his thoughts and impressions, and he had an unquenchable desire to absorb the cultural life around him. A year later, Rudolph became a regular corps de ballet dancer at the Ufa Opera. Corps de ballet are a group of dancers who are a permanent part of a ballet company but aren't soloists. The Ufa Opera director did not like Nureyev's inability to conform, but he offered him a full-time position. For someone of Nureyev's humble background, this was an incredible opportunity, but he refused. All he could think about was Leningrad. Soon after, he got an opportunity to dance in Moscow. While he was there, he auditioned for the prestigious Bolshoi Ballet School and was offered a position, which was nothing short of a miracle. But the Bolshoi did not have a residential college attached to it, and even if Nureyev won a scholarship, he wouldn't be able to survive. On the other hand, in Leningrad, students were able to obtain room and board at the Kirov. Nureyev collected all his money and bought a one-way ticket for Leningrad. A week later, he auditioned at the Kirov and was told, "You'll either become a brilliant dancer or a total failure." Most ballet students enter ballet school when they're 6 or 7 years old. Nureyev had hardly any classical training. He was accepted into the Kirov on his raw talent when he was 17 years old. To transform his natural expressive gift into a lasting professional one, he would have to work harder than anyone else in the school. At the Leningrad school, Nureyev received a fantastically well-rounded artistic education in the history of music, art, classical dancing, and literature, as well as lectures in physics, chemistry, geography, and more. But at the hands of the director of the school, Nureyev suffered constant humiliation and bullying. The director of the Kirov school called Rudolph a good-for-nothing provincial, never hesitating to remind him that his acceptance into his famous school was an act of charity, waiting for the opportunity to throw Nureyev out the door. To make matters worse, Nureyev alienated the communist collective by doing things on his own, like going to ballet performances and concerts, and seeking friendships outside the rigid life of school. The solitude and individuality Nureyev craved were despised. From his autobiography, speaking of his classmates at the Kirov, Nureyev wrote, "One day they hauled me over to the mirror, covering one entire wall of our classroom. 'Look at yourself, Nureyev. You'll never be able to dance. It just isn't possible. You're simply not built for it. You have nothing, no schooling and no technique. How do you have the nerve to work with us?' And it was true. I had nothing. To those excellent students, technically highly equipped and proud of their traditional style, I came as a nasty shock. They just couldn't accept me. At the same time, the more I looked at them, the surer I felt that I, too, had my rightful place there. Not that I was pleased with myself. I simply knew that I had the right to dance, and that was what I'd been born to do. And that I had to go on fighting until they accepted the fact." When Nureyev entered the class of Alexander Pushkin, the legendary ballet teacher, things improved. Nureyev blossomed under Pushkin's instruction for 2 years, always engineering his own destiny, finding ways to dance what he wanted. In spite of the constant opposition, Nureyev prepared dancing pieces for a competition in Moscow, which became his first public triumph and led to being offered a soloist position at both the Bolshoi and Kirov ballet companies. Nureyev chose the Kirov because he felt he would have more artistic freedom, but he had the same problems he'd had in school, a desire to be an individual. When the Kirov was slated to perform for a month in Paris in 1961, Nureyev never thought he'd be on that trip. The Ministry of Culture had already informed him that his insubordination would be punished by never letting him cross a foreign frontier. But since the top dancers of the company were over 40 and 50 and deemed too old to captivate a French audience, to avoid the shame of a half-empty opera house, the nonconformist black sheep of the Kirov, Rudolf Nureyev, was allowed to go under strict supervision. Again, from his wonderful autobiography. Speaking of the time at Le Bourget Airport in Paris, when Nureyev defected in 1961, he wrote, "I should explain that we never did anything by ourselves. At home, many of us still share a room with other people, and so our lives are shaped into a consistent pattern of collective thinking, collective eating, collective travel. We simply never take individual action, never go anywhere alone, and collective tickets are issued for every undertaking. For workers, artists, scientists, or whatsoever, there is always a man in charge who handles everything and stands between us and the world." At the airport in Paris, Nureyev waited with the rest of the company to board a plane for London, when he was told that he would suddenly be leaving in 2 hours for a special dance performance in the Kremlin the next day. And they assured him that they would put him on the first plane back to London to rejoin the company. Nureyev wrote, "I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew exactly where I stood, and also what this immediate recall to Moscow would entail. No foreign travel ever again, and the position of star dancer to which I was entitled in a couple of years would be forever denied me. I would be consigned to complete obscurity." After seeking asylum with the French authorities at the airport, Nureyev wrote, "The inspectors explained that I would have to sign a request form for an official sanctuary permit, but before that could be done, according to the rules, I must spend 5 minutes alone in a room to reflect, away from all pressure, on the decision I was about to take. The room, they told me, had 2 doors. Should I decide to go back to Russia, one door would lead me discreetly back into the hall from whence I could board the Tupolev. Should I decide to stay in France, the other door led into their own private office." Then there was silence. I was alone, 4 white walls and 2 doors, 2 exits to 2 different lives. For me, this was already a return to dignity. The right to choose, the right I cherished most of all, that of self-determination. Naturally, my thoughts turned to my relatives, to my teacher Pushkin, a kind of second father to me. Tamara, the girl I liked, perhaps loved. I felt really I didn't know anymore. The Kirov, to me, the first ballet company in the world. All that I had held most dear and had made me into what I am. Yet at the same time, the life of daily, niggling persecution, insinuations, petty denunciations, the kind of life which, as I well knew, had caused so many young artists of my own generation to put an end to it all by jumping in the river, rather than carry on a hopeless fight. On the other hand, what lay in store for me on the other side of the fence here in Europe? I would be alone, but not in the way I had always longed for. This would be utter solitude. The new freedom wore an austere look. Yet I knew it was the only choice because it alone offered the hope of being at last able to really do something, to learn, to see, to grow. There was a hope of this, and that was enough. As the Russian saying goes, a young man lives on hope alone. A group of individuals, each with something unique to contribute, each with the free will to choose, can be a very powerful force. A collective, a groupthink of robot-like people guided by strict ideology can be a very dangerous force, and it is weak, which is why it leads to oppression and the eradication of individual freedom, to maintain a hold on power through violence that could never be maintained by free will. Rudolf Nureyev, never settled for the status quo, for what people thought he was capable of. In an environment of individual oppression, he found ways to exert his individuality and to excel. In defecting to the West, Nureyev made an incredible sacrifice, and he had a tough and lonely road to follow. But he found the freedom to express himself, and in doing so, he spread his wings, soaring to the heights of artistry, dazzling the world with his brilliance, and becoming one of the most influential dancers of all time. Destiny is something you shape for yourself, like a diamond in the rough. You craft, you polish, you work hard, you dream, you toil, you fight for the path you want to take in life. There is no greater dignity than the dignity to choose a life that is yours, to have the freedom to fail, to have the dream of success, to have the hope of individual expression. In our own individuality, each one of us has an opportunity to be memorable, to do something only we can do, in a way only we can imagine. And that's today's Happy Nugget. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, share it, and subscribe. As always, I link below the video anything I recommend. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for watching. See you next time.